The objective of this presentation is to eliminate any apprehension you may have about certification. So right from the very beginning, I want you to forget the word certification. Forget all about it. Because I'm going to demonstrate to you that the implementation of best practice is 90% of the way towards certification. The 10% is the bit that none of us like, and that's writing it down so the auditor can see what you're doing. Forget the word certification, think of best practice. And if you are practicing best practice now, which you will be, or you'll be out of a job, you're already 90% of the way to achieving certification. And part 3, if we have time, or if we may get there sooner or later, I'm going to look at the RSPO Supply Chain Certification, the SCC. That'll be a fairly brief one, because it's really from the palm oil mill going forward to the refineries and down to the end user. At any stage during the talk today, please feel free to ask a question. And I will be pausing at certain times to invite questions, and certainly just after coffee break or lunch break, we'll make sure we have a question and answer session. So either save your questions for then, talk to me over coffee or lunch, or put your hand up, and there will be a roving microphone, we can ask the questions. I do apologise, I have to sit down again. It's from planting too many trees, pushing a spade down my right leg. The old hip's getting a bit gabby, but I'll sit and stand up. I make the documents available to all delegates. So available to you is this full PowerPoint presentation and other files which include preparing for an RSPO audit, new planting procedures, what I call a P&C compliance manual, which I'll talk about more later on, an Excel score sheet, the RSPO SCC compliance manual, and a summary of the supply chain standard. Now I do have 18 discs with all that information on them. They are all in English, and there are only 18, but if you have a computer as well, we can transfer the files direct to your own computer. So please don't all rush for one of these, if you could be selective within inside your organisation. I think there are 18, they were used last week, so they have a slight pedal, but that does rub off. It's a permanent template, it will rub off. So what is the RSPO? Well, the RSPO was formed in 2001 as a coming together of people who were interested in promoting the sustainable growth of oil palm. It started in Switzerland, and the principal objective of RSPO is to promote the growth and the use of sustainable palm oil. And to me, that word "and" is incredibly important. The English language is a very rich language, and you can change the emphasis just by changing the way you talk about something. So if I emphasize the word "and," it's promoting the growth and the use of. If I just go "and," it doesn't have the same impact. But to me, the RSPO is promoting the growth on a sustainable basis and the use of the sustainable palm oil that was grown, that resulted from that sustainable growth. Let's see what's happening in the world of certification for RSPO. From beginning of 2013 to 2014, the number of growers who were certified grew from 44 to 50. The area has grown to almost 2 million hectares, and I think by now it would have exceeded 2 million hectares. We see the number of extractora associated with that 2 million hectares is coming in at 196. Auditors have what we call rules of thumb. We know that it's roughly 1 tonne of water per tonne of FFB. We know roughly how much fertiliser. We know roughly it's 20 metric tonnes of EFB to go back into the plantation. To me, one palm oil mill or one extractora normally has about 8,000 hectares. So that, to me, my rule of thumb, is just about right. If all the palm oil mills or the extractora which are certified were selling all the oil that they were producing as certified, there would be 8.7 million tonnes of oil coming into the marketplace. The fact is that there is not 8.7 million tonnes being demanded by the refineries. But what we're seeing is that the supply chain is growing from 261 companies last year to 548 companies this year. The facilities below that, it shows what we call multi-sites. So if a company has, say, 5 refineries, they can have one certificate and cover the 5 refineries under a multi-site certificate, because they have common practices for all the 5 refineries. So that's where the facilities obviously exceed the number of certified companies. Some companies have up to 12 sites. Unilever are going to have hundreds of sites under one certificate. If we look at the actual sales, 8.73 million tonnes is the potential quantity of certified sustainable palm oil that could leave the palm oil mills if it was all sold. In 2013, only 1.5 million tonnes was sold through the physical sales of identity preserved and mass balance supply chain models, which I'll talk to you more about later on. There was almost 3 million tonnes sold through what we call a booking claim system. And again, I'll be expanding on that later on. And it's the selling of certificates into the marketplace. So the reality is that the RSPO would very much like to see companies taking up the physical use of oil. So you're actually buying the physical product and you're using that as a certified sustainable product right through the supply chain. Only 1.5 million tonnes was entering the supply chain. The RSPO will say to you, hey, there's 4.46 million tonnes, that's 50%. Mr. RSPO, no, only 17% is actually being sold as certified. And if you think that there's almost 60 million tonnes of CPO being produced around the globe, we've got a long way to go to really get the oil palm industry certified. So that's why I say thank you for being here. A lot of my work comes into the supply chain. If you lay a chain on the table and you certify all the 15, 16 million hectares of oil palm around the world, you can't push the oil through a chain because the chain will kink. However, if we go to the end user and say, Mr. End User, we would like to explain to you why you should be using certified sustainable palm oil in your products, we get the demand at this end. You can pull a chain, clink, 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 back to you guys, and you're going to see a real benefit as to why you should be certified. So we have a lot of work to do. And as I say, a lot of my work is promoting the use of sustainable palm oil in the marketplace. We've all seen this slide from the RSPO website. We know Malaysia and Indonesia are the main producers. And then we can break down by the various countries. So Guatemala is coming in at about 0.265 million tonnes per year, and growing, of course. The trademark is interesting reading. This is companies that wish to put the RSPO trademark on the final product. They have to have a trademark license as well as being RSPO supply chain certified. Oh, sorry, I don't know what's gone back. We're seeing Germany leaping ahead, followed rapidly by the United Kingdom and France, but we're still looking at tiny numbers. If we think of Yves Rocher, they use 50 metric tonnes of palm oil equivalent a year in their cosmetic products. Haribo Sweeties, I think it's 500 metric tonnes a year. So you see, all these certificate holders, they're using tiny quantities of palm compared to the quantities which you're producing from your palm oil mills. America doesn't feature. The only certificate in in Colombia is Gabon. So we need to start driving forward the supply chain to come back to you to give a real good benefit for you to go through the certification process. This is a slightly busy slide, so I don't expect you to follow the whole thing. But the way I describe the supply chain is it's actually very, very simple. We start off at the top left-hand side with the primary production, which is the oil palm plantation. And they're producing the primary product of the fresh fruit bunch. Around the world, we've got about 15, maybe 16 million hectares right now of oil palm. The average yield of FFB globally is about 16 metric tons per hectare per year. Earlier this year I was in Madagascar and they're producing 3.5 metric tons FFB per year. The highest yield I've seen is in Malaysia, where one plantation hits 61 metric tons per hectare per year. But if we're looking at maybe 30, 32 metric tons, hey, that's a pretty good target to get to. But 16 metric tons is the global average. The FFB clearly goes into what I call the primary processing, being the oil palm mill, the extractora. And the output from the extractora will be crude palm oil and palm kernel. If you have the kernel crushing plant, you can have the palm kernel oil and maybe some byproducts like the kernel expeller. So they could be integrated into a company that owns the extractora and the oil palm plantations, or they could be totally independent extractora. And again, the average oil extraction rate globally is 20%. The lowest I've seen is about 15.6%. The highest I've seen is 25.32%. I don't think it's physically capable of getting much higher than that unless you change the crop genetics. So we then go into the refinery, the secondary processing, and the primary output is going to be the refined palm oil, or that's about now being shortened from refined, bleached, deodorized palm oil. And there are going to be the other refinations of stearine and oleine, and then obviously the distillations going into the oleochemicals. And a refinery can handle anything between a few hundred or a few thousand tons, and the biggest refinery I've seen is Wilmar in North Sumatra. They handle 2 million tons of CPO a year. And they have a jetty of 2 kilometers into the ocean, and they have 60,000 ton ships to take the CPO into the European markets. The reason for telling you about that is very relevant when it comes to the supply chain models, and you'll understand the complexity of producing certain types of supply chain models. We then go into secondary processing, and the outputs are going to be the edible oils and fats, the shortenings, the oleochemicals, and into the final product, everything we use on a daily basis. So if you haven't used oil palm yet today, you certainly will have done by 6 o'clock tonight. Controlling the supply chain from the palm oil mill through to the final user is what we call the RSPO supply chain. And depending on which model you choose, identity preserved, segregation or mass balance, or the book and claim supply chain model, that will determine the market claim that can go on to the final product. Let's look at the primary production, right at the very beginning. The typical scenario we have in Asia is on the left-hand side with a white box. We have the extractora. Clearly we have a supply base for the extractora, and they're going to be predominantly the owned plantations. So if we think of United Plantations, Musimas, Feldar, Wilmar, they have a vast supply base which they own, up to 750,000 hectares in some cases. Below them, we have what we call scheme smallholders. And scheme smallholders are very, very specific to Asia. And I'll talk about that more when we come into the national interpretations for individual countries. As we move into Latin American and certainly African countries, we want to move slightly to the right down the stream. You're going to have the independent extractora and the extractora, but your supply base is going to be some owned plantations, but in some cases 100% reliance on independent growers. And it's how those independent growers are organised and looked after by the extractora, which is critical to certification. The independent growers could be formed into alliances in Colombia, or cooperatives, or whatever you wish to call them, and they could be organised into what's called group schemes, which are very formal and very regulated forms of being certified. And I will tell you now that group schemes will not work in Latin America. And I'm telling the RSPO, a formal group structure with a set of rules and signing up to a predetermined length of time will not work for independent growers in general in Latin America. So what we're looking at here is the extractora, some own plantations, and independent growers. Notice that I'm avoiding the use of the word smallholder for the Latin American context. Smallholders predominate in the principles and criteria that the RSPO have written. All through the guidance notes in the principles and criteria 2013, smallholders, scheme smallholders, associated smallholders, plasma growers, inti growers. These are all Asian contexts. You don't have associated or scheme smallholders. You may have people who have a financial obligation and will deliver fruits to your extractora, but it's not the same concept as the scheme smallholders in Asia. So we need to think of your independent growers as independent growers. They may include people who are classified as smallholders, and they are defined by the RSPO as having less than 50 hectares, but independent growers are not exclusively smallholders. This is a very, very important point to remember when it comes to developing national interpretations and as you go through your certification process. The unit of certification, the certification body will do an audit of the extractora and the supply base. So that is the unit of certification. And the certificate will be in the name of the extractora, with the supply base listed in the annex, and the quantities of the projected quantities of crude palm oil, palm kernel, and palm kernel oil that can be produced from that extractora. The certificate, as I say, is awarded to the extractora. The audit and the audit report will include the extractora and the complete supply base of the fresh fruit bunches. In Latin America, we're going to have your own plantations and also a predominance of independent growers. So let's consider independent growers in RSPO, because again, they're not considered by the RSPO. And I think it's a very sad fact, and I'm going to be very unpopular with the RSPO, when I say to them, they do not understand what is happening in Latin America. They really don't know how you manage your plantations and the very sensitive relationship you may have with independent growers. And we really need to educate the RSPO as to what is happening. So the RSPO has many documents relating to the certification of smallholders. There must be about 8 or 9 on the website. And they say the planted area of oil palm is usually below 50 hectares. Currently, there is no mechanism for certifying anybody with more than 50 hectares as an independent grower. Now that will sound pretty scary to you, and it should seem pretty scary to you. However, there is a group scheme for independent growers. This was initiated by the RSPO last year. I was one of the authors of it with Simon Lord, who is the director of New Britain Palm Oils in Papua New Guinea. And it's going to be applicable to independent growers of up to 2,000 hectares. It's with the steering committee now, but what I realised, to my horror, when I really got to know about how you operate over here, a group scheme, as myself and Simon Lord wrote it, will not work over here. And I sent him an email literally last week to say, Simon, this will not work in Latin America. I've had no response yet, but I am putting forward proposals as to how independent growers can be certified. And we do have a precedent already. I have 3 precedents for you. I'm going to name a 4th as well. Like I say, I'm somebody that tries to make things happen. In 2009, I was asked for Control Union to do an audit of Felda. Now, Felda are the biggest growers of oil palm in the world. They have over 700,000 hectares of oil palm. I've been auditing countries like Sime Darby, Musimas, United Plantations, IOI, and I thought I was going to another Wilmar, in the sense that it was a company with huge plantations and extractorial. I arrived very jet-lagged, and we had a 5-hour drive from Kuala Lumpur to the plantation on a Sunday evening. We're having dinner, and they're explaining to me how they operate. And I suddenly thought, they are a group scheme, because they have tens of thousands of independent growers, albeit in a 750,000 hectares of oil palm. My checklist was for the Wilmars of the world. So at 10 o'clock, I said to the guys that I have to go to bed. Between 10 o'clock and 3 o'clock in the morning, I go onto the RSPO website, downloaded every document I could find on smallholders, and I wrote a checklist and report in those 5 hours to allow me to do the audit of 25,000 hectares with 4 auditors over the next 10-day period. I had to think really fast on my feet. Now the result of that is I've now got certified plantations because I had the nous to make it happen for them. When we come to slightly smaller scale, I went to Ivory Coast 3 years ago, and it was Agrivar is a totally independent palm oil mill. And they have independent growers who are organised into cooperatives. And those members of the cooperative varied in size from 1 hectare to about 400 hectares. I used my common sense, and I made it very, very clear in the audit report of the scale of the independent growers who have been included in the supply base. That audit report was fully peer-reviewed by the RSPO, and that company is certified and producing certified sustainable palm oil. That's 2 precedents I've set. 3rd precedent, Colombia, Gabon. They have 7 cooperatives, and they have areas of oil palm of those independent growers of up to 400 or 500 hectares. So again, that's the 3rd precedent set, that we've already got independent growers certified over 50 hectares. And now, even more recently, just last year in Ecuador, Natural Habitats, their supply base is predominantly coming in from the independent growers. 650 hectares in one case. So again, I detailed this in the report, and I did a sampling to suit or to match the variation in the size of the growers. That was fully peer-reviewed by the RSPO, and Natural Habitats has been certified. So that's 4 precedents I could set for the certification of independent growers. So where I said on the last slide that there is no system by the RSPO for anyone with 50.1 hectares to be certified, that is still correct, but we have the precedent, we have the mechanism, and the knowledge and the drive to make this happen. Because we can't sit back and wait for the RSPO. When did you last send an email to the RSPO and get a reply? Maybe 3, 4, 5, 6 months ago? I applied for membership with the RSPO. My membership wasn't even acknowledged for 7 months, by which time I'd given up. I said, no, I'm not going to join you. You can't be bothered to read my application, I'm not joining. I'm still not a member of the RSPO. So the important thing though is we have the precedent set for certifying your independent growers here in Latin America. Looking at the RSPO across the globe, auditors have to consider the scale of the operations. The bottom left and the bottom 2 pictures are obviously in Africa. You can change that photograph with a different culture, and you've got Latin America. The crops may be different. The 2 or 3 hectares of oil palm in the smallholder plantation is surrounded by pineapple, rubber, and other agricultural crops. The top right-hand picture could be the smallholders of Asia. When a company develops, say, 20,000 hectares in Asia, they have to put aside 2,000 hectares for the smallholders. So a 2,000 hectare block is developed for maybe 100 or 150 smallholders, and it's one contiguous block of oil palm. It is managed as one contiguous block. That does not happen, I can't generalise, I don't think that happens in Latin America. You're looking at independent growers with 2, 3, 5, 200, 400, 600 hectares. Even those bigger areas are broken up in Latin American countries. So what concerns me hugely is the knowledge of the auditors who are potentially going to be auditing your oil palm. And if there's any auditors in here, I'm sorry, I'm going to upset you. We have a drink of water. Certification bodies have a habit of looking at the qualifications of an auditor and saying, you're qualified, get on with it. The RSPO stipulates the minimum qualifications for a lead auditor and the audit team. And the lead auditor, post-grad degree course, post-school degree course, he has to have 15 days experience in another or similar industry. He has to have one or two other qualifications, but he does not have to have one single piece of experience in oil palm. He does not need to attend a training course to be an auditor for oil palm. When they go to the supply chain, they have to attend a 2-day training course, and I happen to run one of the only endorsed training courses for the supply chain. The auditors have to come to me for 2 days and sit a 2.5-hour exam. And what I know when they leave that room, that they know what they need to know. If they don't know what they need to know, I have failed in my job. Like today, if you don't leave today with a huge knowledge of RSPO, I failed, and I won't look at myself in the mirror tonight. So, we need to consider how we're going to get the auditors trained in Latin America to understand the Latin American situation. Because if you have an auditor from Asia, he is going to look at you and go, huh? What on earth is all this? And he will not be able to, or she will fail dismally auditing you. And that's why I'm very anxious to write a training course specifically for Latin America. The world of certification. My title is Certification in No Uncertain Terms. I use the word in no uncertain terms because I try and cut through all the, I'm not going to use any nasty word, but I try to cut through all the bureaucracy, should we say. I work with 12 different standards. When I first looked at the Forest Stewardship Standard in 1996 in the United Kingdom, my reaction was, hey, I'm doing this already. I am a professional forester. I'm doing this already. Why do I need these people to come and say, hey, we want to see if you're doing it properly, and we want to do an audit report? Well, that's what certification is all about. We have to demonstrate to another authority that we are managing our plantations in accordance with the requirements of the standards. Certification is 90% best practice and 10% writing it down. And I've been proved correct on this time after time after time. So, as I say, if you are already doing best practice, you are 90% of the way to being certified. Any certification is made more complicated by the people that write the standards. And I'm sorry, Mr. RSPO, that some of the supporting documents for the RSPO is pretty terrible. If we look at the new planting procedures, there are 6 documents. They're called new planting procedures, they're called procedures for new planting. What is it, Mr. RSPO? Is it MPP or PMP? Come on. Fundamental mistakes like that annoy me. 6 documents, which are highly confusing. I wrote them into 3 pages, all those 6 documents. And that is available on this disc here. Poor auditors make certification complicated because they come with preconceived expectations and they don't bother to learn, to look, to listen and to understand. We have ignorance of those with a vested interest. People that think they can make money out of confusing you. A good consultant is a consultant that comes today and goes tomorrow. A bad consultant is one that comes today and stays with you and may disappear in 2 or 3 years' time. Choose your consultant very, very carefully. And then we have the last thing, poor preparation of clients in advance of an audit. preparation and helping you to understand what this certification process is of critical importance to making the whole certification program run smoothly. So what is certification? I've talked about this word a few times now. It starts off with having a standard. We have unwritten standards. We've all come today quite smart, not wearing our work boots or our work shirts. We come because we know there's an unwritten standard as to how we present ourselves at a meeting like this. I'm letting myself down because I should wear a tie, but I don't tend to wear one in these hot climates. So we already have a set of unwritten standards in the way we manage ourselves in everyday life. For oil palm, we have the standards set by the RSPO, so they become the standard setting authority. To demonstrate or to confirm that you are complying with that standard, a third-party compliance audit of your management systems is conducted by an accredited certification body. Now, if you go to the RSPO website, you will see accredited certification bodies. Up until 2013, December 2013, the certification bodies were approved by the RSPO to be able to conduct competent audits and award certificates of compliance with the RSPO standard. In December 2013, all the certification bodies have to go through what's called an accreditation process. And the RSPO have appointed Accreditation Services International to conduct accreditation audits of all the certification bodies. And because there are 14 or 15 certification bodies, this process is taking much longer than the RSPO could ever have envisaged. So the whole process is gumming up the works. The whole certification process is coming to a dramatic halt at this moment in time. A third-party audit is different to an internal audit. When you do an internal audit, you're going into your plantations and you're looking for all the faults, you're looking for all the problems, and you're going to your managers and say, hey, sort yourselves out. Come on, we need better practice. A third-party audit is coming in to understand how your systems are working as they are at that moment in time. We're not there to criticise them or to commend them. We're there to look at them. So, once we've done a compliance audit, our audit report then goes to the certifier who is inside the certification body that you have chosen. And the certifier will look at that report, come back to the audit teams for clarification, may come back to you for clarification, and it is the certifier and the certifier alone who makes the certification decision. The certifier has nothing to do with the audit. It's the lead auditor and the audit team of 2 or 3 that produce the report for the certifier to review. So the certification bodies become accredited, and in the certification body's defence, the accreditation process is very expensive. It's also very time-consuming because ASI, Accreditation Services International, are doing a shadow audit in the plantations. They're watching the audit team at work. They're doing a shadow audit in the supply chain, watching the audit team at work. They're then doing an audit of the systems that the certification body has, and they have to be in compliance with the likes of 17021, which you don't need to know about. ISO 65, which you don't need to know about unless you're 9001 certified, in which case you do need to know about ISO 65. The important thing is certification bodies are accredited, you become certified. Maybe you're thinking I'm a bit pedantic, but that is the terminology, so don't think we're accredited, you're not. The CBs are accredited, you become certified due to a third-party compliance audit. The audit itself, I really want to lay the foundation before we go into looking at the principles and criteria. So, the auditors are seeking positive evidence of compliance. Now that's going to sound very strange to you internal auditors who are going in to find fault. A good auditor comes into the company with no preconceived expectations and will look to see how your systems are in compliance with the standard. If they don't find compliance, they find non-compliance. To give you an example, if I go into a plantation and I see bare ground, my immediate reaction could be, this is through overspray. Therefore, I'm going to raise a major non-compliance in principle 4 because you're using an excessive quantity of herbicide. And that actually is what ASI does. And we have to really, auditors have a heck of a hard time with ASI, but that's another story. What I do is I say to the plantation manager, tell me about this bare ground. And it could be because it was flooded and the grass was being killed. It could be very simply that they had a new spray team and there was a bit of a problem with that team, and we could certainly see how they rectified that in training. When we're going to look at a spray team in action, I say to the managers in the vehicles going towards it, tell me, what am I going to see here? And they say, you're going to see the spray team, they're going to be wearing all the protective equipment as per our risk assessment, and they're going to be spraying a pattern around each part. If I go to site and I see one of the sprayer walking down the plantation going ballistic, I have to ask myself, is that guy scared to death because he's got all these managers and this audit team watching what he's doing? Is he badly trained, or is it bad supervision? And very often it's the first one. He's scared to death because he's got all these people descending on him. So auditors must appreciate that the audit itself can affect the way that people operate. I have been audited about 30 times, and I hate it with a vengeance. So I know how you feel when you're being audited. And auditors have to take that into account. So we are seeking positive evidence of compliance. Only an unprofessional auditor will set out to find fault. If you have an auditor that comes into your office with the attitude, I'm going to find fault with you guys, take them by the scruff of the neck, the belt of the trousers, and throw them out of the highest window you can find. Because we are a profession, and we don't want bad auditors bringing down our profession. Ask them to leave the building. Pick up the phone to the certification body straight away and say, Mr. CB, that auditor is not professional, we will not have him doing our audit. You have every right to do that. Exercise that right. Please, I really implore you to exercise that right. Auditing is a profession. Not every Tom, Dick or Harry can do it. That is another training session I have for auditors. I have 6 honest serving men. They help me in all I do. The names of where and what and when, and how and why and who. When we do audits, we say, how do you do this? Who does it? Where do you keep your records? Why do you have to manage that high conservation area? And you have to answer those questions with how you do it. If I say to you, do you have a soil map? You'll say yes. So I say, show me. So take those questions into every document you design. Where, what, when, how, why, who. And I've written those 6 questions across whiteboards and blackboards right around the tropical belt. Very, very important questions. Fundamental. You're doing it already without actually realizing you're doing it. But if I can make you think about those 6 questions, when you do your documents, you're going to prepare a procedure. We have a procedure. How do we implement that procedure? Who is going to implement that procedure? How do we demonstrate to the certification body that procedure has been implemented? So always bear those questions in mind as you prepare your documents. We just have a delivery.
Oh.
So I hope by now you're understanding that certification is not something to be scared of. It's something which you can embrace through the implementation of best practice. Now it just happens I put together 13 steps. You can make it 2 or 3 steps.